In the summer of 1683, an Ottoman army so vast it darkened the horizon marched toward Vienna. If Vienna fell, nothing would stop Ottoman forces from advancing deep into Central Europe and reshaping the balance of power forever. Vienna was not simply another city under threat. It was the central gateway between Eastern and Western Europe. Situated along the Danube River, Vienna controlled the primary land routes linking the Balkans to the interior of the continent. For centuries, the city had served as the eastern defensive anchor of the Habsburg Empire. Any army advancing westward from Ottoman-controlled territory was forced to confront Vienna before moving deeper into Europe. There were no alternative routes that bypassed the city without exposing supply lines and rear positions. If Vienna fell, the consequences would extend far beyond Austria. Southern Germany, Bavaria, and the heart of the Holy Roman Empire would lie exposed. No comparable fortress stood ready to halt further advance. For Europe, Vienna represented the final defensive barrier. For the Ottomans, it represented an opportunity to deliver a decisive strategic blow. The campaign against Vienna was led by Grand Vizier Mustafa Pasha, the most powerful figure in the Ottoman Empire after the Sultan himself. He commanded a vast multinational army drawn from across the empire, including seasoned soldiers, provincial levies, and elite janissary units. Mustafa believed Vienna could be taken by force and speed. His strategy relied on relentless pressure, overwhelming numbers, and psychological shock. Once the city fell, European resistance would fracture, forcing political concessions across the region. Time, however, was critical. Winter would make supply impossible, and prolonged operations deep in enemy territory carried serious risk. The campaign was launched with confidence that Vienna would collapse quickly. That confidence shaped every decision made during the siege. Inside Vienna, the reality of the siege became increasingly brutal with each passing day. The city's garrison was small, composed of professional soldiers reinforced by militia and civilians who had been armed out of necessity rather than training. From the beginning, food supplies were limited, and rationing was introduced almost immediately. As the siege dragged on, conditions deteriorated rapidly. Disease spread through the crowded streets and makeshift shelters, weakening defenders who were already exhausted from constant bombardment. Artillery fire shook the city day and night, while mining explosions collapsed sections of walls that had protected Vienna for generations. Despite these conditions, the defenders understood their role with grim clarity. They were not expected to defeat the Ottoman army in open battle. Their task was to endure, to delay, and to survive long enough for relief forces to arrive from the west. Ottoman cannons and mining charges tore into Vienna's walls, collapsing bastions and pushing the city toward destruction. By early September, Vienna reached its most desperate moment. Entire sections of the fortifications had been reduced to rubble, leaving defenders dangerously exposed to direct assault. Repairs made during the night were often destroyed by renewed bombardment the following morning, erasing any progress made under cover of darkness. Inside the city, exhaustion overwhelmed soldiers and civilians alike. Food shortages worsened, clean water became scarce, and morale declined as casualties mounted. Hospitals overflowed, while disease spread faster than wounds could heal. Fear became a constant presence, reinforced by every explosion and collapse. Another major assault could end everything. Relief forces had not yet appeared, and time was slipping away. Every hour mattered. Every delay carried the weight of survival. A relief army led by King John III Sobieski of Poland was racing toward Vienna with all possible speed. The approaching relief force represented Vienna's final hope. It was composed of troops drawn from across Europe, united by the understanding that the city's fall would threaten them all. At its head stood King John III Sobieski of Poland, a commander known for discipline, resolve, and decisive action. The march toward Vienna was rapid and deliberate. The army moved with urgency, aware that delay could mean arriving too late. Scouts confirmed the scale of Ottoman siege works and the city's worsening condition, reinforcing the need for immediate action. Coordination among Allied forces was critical. Different contingents advanced through forests and hills, maintaining secrecy as long as possible. Their objective was not simply to lift the siege, but to strike decisively before the Ottomans could react. On the 12th of September, 1683, the relief army finally launched its attack. Allied forces advanced from the surrounding hills toward the Ottoman siege lines in carefully coordinated movements. The Ottomans, focused almost entirely on breaching Vienna's defenses, were caught off guard by the sudden appearance of a large organized army striking from higher ground. Siege equipment was abandoned as Ottoman units rushed to form defensive positions. Artillery crews fled their guns, supply wagons were left behind, and command structures began to fracture under pressure. What had taken months to construct began to unravel within a matter of hours. Confusion spread rapidly across the battlefield. Orders failed to reach frontline units, formations broke apart, and momentum shifted decisively. The siege that had pushed Vienna to the brink of collapse now faced destruction from an unexpected direction. The decisive moment of the battle came with the charge of the Polish winged hussars. Armored cavalry descended from the hills in a massive coordinated assault, gaining speed as they advanced toward the Ottoman center. Their formation remained intact as they struck with overwhelming force, cutting through enemy lines already weakened by confusion and disorder. The psychological impact was immediate and devastating. Ottoman units broke apart under the pressure, officers lost control of their formations, and retreat quickly replaced resistance. Attempts to regroup failed as panic spread across the battlefield and discipline collapsed. Within hours, the Ottoman army was no longer capable of continuing the siege. What had once appeared to be unstoppable military power ended in sudden and complete reversal, driven by speed, shock, and decisive leadership. As the battle turned decisively against him, Mustafa Pasha ordered a retreat. Ottoman forces abandoned artillery, supplies, and siege equipment across the battlefield as they withdrew in growing disorder. Camps that had taken weeks to establish were left behind almost intact, marking the sudden collapse of the campaign. The consequences of the defeat were immediate and far-reaching. Ottoman expansion into Central Europe was halted permanently, and the empire's ability to launch large-scale offensives westward was effectively broken. From this point onward, Ottoman strategy shifted increasingly toward defense rather than conquest. Vienna's survival reshaped alliances, stabilized contested borders, and altered the balance of power across Europe. The siege became a defining moment, signaling the beginning of a long transformation in European and Ottoman history. The Siege of Vienna was not simply a battle for a city. It was a confrontation that determined the direction of European history. Had Vienna fallen, the political and cultural landscape of the continent would have been permanently altered. Instead, the city endured long enough for events to turn. Coordination, resilience, and decisive action combined at a critical moment to change the course of history. Vienna's survival stands as a reminder that empires are shaped not only by conquest, but by moments when resistance holds just long enough for the balance to shift. The Siege of Vienna reminds us that history often turns on a single moment of endurance. Had the city fallen, Europe's future would have looked very different. If you value factual, cinematic history that explores decisive battles, consider subscribing to Blackstone Battlecraft.